My name's Ray Poynter. I'm going to be the MC for the session today. So what I'm going to do now is invite all the panel members to unmute themselves, to turn on their cameras and say hi.
Hi, everyone. Melanie here.
Hi, Ray.
Excellent. Okay. So let's just run around the panel and ask everyone to briefly introduce themselves. So Sandy, if you could go first.
Sure. Thanks, Ray. I am Sandy Casey. I am the SVP of Global Supply at NewMR. I have been in the industry working within the supply space for a little bit over 20 years, having worked at companies such as Cint, Greenfield Online, if you can remember Greenfield Online from way back when, and Taluna. I've been at NewMR right now for 3 years coming up in March, and I want to thank you for letting us participate. This is a great sort of forum for us to all come in and talk about what we see happening in the year to come.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sandy. Mike.
Thanks, Ray. I'm Mike, and I run a consulting business that helps agencies and insights teams figure out research and technology. And I run a website called Insight Platforms, which is a directory, online events and training course business. Fantastic.
And Seyi, if you could go next.
Right. My name is Seyi Adeoye. I'm the CEO of Pairing Consulting. Prior to that, being in companies like Poynter, Research International, and also on the client side, financial services before now. Happy to be here, Ray. Thank you for the invite.
And Seyi, where are you based?
Lagos, Nigeria. Although we work across Africa, we also have other offices in Ghana and Nairobi where we work out from.
Fantastic. Melanie.
Hi, everyone. Melanie Courtright. I'm the CEO of the Insights Association. That's a trade association from the US. I've been in the space for, 30 years, Ray. Come from about 12 years in full service and then moved into online and panel. And my most recent job before I took on this one was head of research and data science for Dynata. So big lover of data, big lover of the space. And thanks, everybody, for being here.
Fantastic. And it's wonderful to have so many newcomers to the industry. I now have changed my bio from over 40 to now it's 45 years in the industry. So we're going to start with a topic that Sandy's brought with her today, which is quality and the initiatives around quality. So thinking about trends in our industry, Sandy, what would you like to tell us and set up as a talking topic about quality?
Thanks, Ray. You know, I think we're going to see 2023 be a year of continued focus on quality. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to see more people understanding that quality issues and risks exist. And I think there's going to be somewhat of a reality check that it's never going to go away. It's impossible to completely alleviate the risk of quality. But in the coming year, I think what we will see is that it's not just going to be a talk track. There's a lot of effort going on in the industry right now, really going in to understand with the former cheaters. We have found people who have been cheaters, have taught people how to cheat, who have since turned white hat. And we're taking the lessons from those people to start really spreading the word on how cheating happens, what is risky for our data, encryptions we need, all of the things that go into the things that become very attractive for people who want to create fraud. In the year to come, I believe wholeheartedly, and I think Melanie would probably agree, you're going to see a lot of the associations coming together to put peer pressure out there in the places where we find risk in the survey programming platforms that create some sort of an ability for people to have a leak in their data quality, data risk, data gaps. I think we might see something where we eventually attract legislature to try and help us stop the people who are educating other people in content platforms on how to cheat. There'll be a grouping of recommendations on what people can do to actually protect their data that much more. And as we get out there, really start to understand wholeheartedly what we can do. We'll never alleviate it, but really get in there to try and minimize the risk of quality issues happening to the data that we collect.
Thanks, Sandy. So I'm going to go to Melanie first, because you did some wonderful town halls last year with a group which had got something like the Alliance for Data Quality in the name. I can't remember. What sort of things were you covering?
So the group's called the Data Integrity Initiative. The most important part that we wanted to start with was making sure we all talk about data integrity and data quality in a consistent and enlightening way. Data integrity, data quality, you guys know this is my bread and butter. It's like where I came from. But we talk about it sometimes in such general, vague terms, and we throw out numbers and nobody quite knows what they mean. We'll say we threw out 35%. Well, 35% of what? What percent was actual fraud? What percent was actual dupes? What percent was cleaning? What percent was over cleaning? What percent was inattentiveness? And so we are wedded to changing the way we talk about data integrity and quality and making sure that we talk about it in really intelligent ways that actually help people know where their most risk is, as Sandy was referring to. And then we want to move into, once we've really well defined it, move into actually measuring what falls into each of those buckets and where we should put our focus as an industry. Should we put it on fraud? Absolutely, all day, every day. But should we also be putting it on how we clean our data set? Probably so. Should we be putting it on our surveys and how we do our surveys? Probably so. It all stacks up to this layers of an onion. And you take this big bite of the onion and all you get is a sour taste. But in order to really get to the heart of it, you're gonna have to get every layer. So we've got a lot to come out in 2023 as well. We're committed to it, and our partnerships are with SMR and other companies, other associations, other companies. But it's, I've been around a long time. We've had these, 6 cycles of working on this, and it's time for another big push and press.
Yes.
Yep.
So, Mike, one of my concerns is around the black boxes. Some of these really nice one stop, all you do is load up your materials to test and they get tested. No human sees where in the marketplace the data was bought from. Nobody looks at it. Your feelings?
That I think there's, the probably needs to emerge some kind of 2-tier framework for this, because it's, if you look at it in the kind of programmatic ad space, there's a hugely really dirty supply chain of eyeballs that are just, fraudulent and everything. And I think that there's starting to emerge premium inventory that people, respect, is fully auditable. You can guarantee that it's humans, and it's something that translates to brand impact or sales uplift or whatever it is. So I think we're always going to have people who are going to look for data at, the cheapest possible price. And it's, you've got 4,500 panels in the Cint network. And, I don't envy the task of trying to consistently manage, effective quality through all of that. So, I think there's a price pressure thing that I don't really think is always recognized, the relationship between price and quality, when you've got buyers who are not really understanding the way in which their research costs break down. So there's a lot to be done at different points in the market. I just want to, Sandy, your interviews that you did with those fraudsters, I've just posted a link because the Innovate and MR and Opinion Route team did these fantastic interviews that were presented at SMR. So have a look at those on that link, because they really bring to life the creativity of the fraudsters that, these guys are having to deal with.
That's funny, Mike. That's exactly what I was referring to. We were at SMR last year, and I recommend everyone take a look at it, because it's eye-opening to see how much it is so easy for people to come in and gamify a survey, so to speak. But the other thing that's very concerning to me is the content channels that allow these people to teach other people how to cheat, or post a survey link to come in and attack. And it's incredibly important we stay on this and continue staying very close to these people that are using these content channels to teach them.
Absolutely. Seyi, any thoughts?
Well, I think generally, it is a task that the entire industry definitely have to have concerted efforts around. If I speak from this part of the world, Africa, where, a lot of surveys still being done face to face. I think the big challenge is around being certain that people are who they are, and then being able to profile them, appropriately, because garbage in, garbage out. And then secondly, to be, just be sure that people are eager to give honest opinion, and not that, that, it's an incentive that's actually driving them to be part of research. And then, they jolly well will tell you anything anyways. And then that will be data that we take forward to clients, and but is actually meaningless because it's being driven, this information you're getting from people who just want to get the incentive from you. So, I mean, online is growing within our space, and some of the things that Sandy's talking about, definitely it's there. We do, online surveys, and then you look at the data. For example, you put up a survey, and then, within a day, you have close to 1,000 responses. It's very clear that it's a tons of fraud. Repeated responses. One individual actually duplicated himself, maybe, God knows how many times. And then, so the data is just all crappy. And then, a couple of ways we are trying to deal with that. It's, forensic checks in terms of building in validation questions and checking, the data itself. That's what we call data auditing, and where we just common sense check, and then there are times that check questions that we put into the questionnaire where if it's a normal flow, you will know that it's a sane person who is actually answering the survey. But when it goes south, that definitely is some fraudulent response that you're getting here. And I think with the advent of AI, there might also be opportunity to do like IP addresses checks, where if, for example, for a particular IP address, you're getting, multiple responses, you already can, kind of blacklist that IP address, knowing fully well that tons of fraudulent responses coming from that. Honestly, I think it might be a challenge close to, a generative type of challenge, that even as we come up with new ways to mitigate it, the fraudsters, we also want to get more intelligent. So it's just about just staying ahead of the curve and being able to give our clients the confidence that they really demand of us, that they want quality data, and quality decisions being made off the back of quality data.
Fantastic. Okay. Thanks.
One thing I think that's important to address as we look at quality, and in the old days, we would send out checks to people, and it had to go to a real address, which means it had to go to a real person. So we've gone out and started to do checks for first redemptions in the panel. And I think instead of having to go face to face, minimizing the online currency reward out of the gate can help mitigate the issues that we see with people who can come in from other areas.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we're going to keep moving. I'm also going to keep in the back of my mind the point that Seyi made about AI for our very last topic. So, Mike, what can market research learn from UX and product research?
Thanks, Ray. This is it's a little bit of a beef of mine. I think the whole industry is struggling to define our space. Market research doesn't feel like enough. It's not big enough. We've got a lot of analytics. We've got a lot of other activities in it. And I've noticed a lot of effort with SMR, with the MRS in the UK, to draw the boundaries of our industry larger by taking a chunk of data analytics revenue. So there's research has been taken, has looked at, let's take a bit of HubSpot's revenue and Salesforce revenue and call it part of the research industry. I don't understand why we're not looking at UX and product research, because there's a huge amount of overlap and adjacency. And there's a lot that we can learn in market research. I think that, UX research really focuses a lot on integrating behavioral research, observational methods with feedback. So whether that's at the kind of analytics level, so integrating user analytics, behavior, or whether it's qualitative stuff, looking at how people interact with a product. So a lot of that, I think, is where the research industry wants to be, the market research industry, with recognizing that people don't always say what they do. The second thing, I think, is a cultural thing in UX research around democratization. So there's a real embrace, and there are lots of factors that make this different, but designers, product managers are encouraged and enjoy and want to do their own research. Specialist UX researchers are generally outnumbered by people who do research. It's normally a much bigger community who are actually interviewing and doing tests and so on. So I think that is not really reflected in the way that in-house market research teams, consumer insights teams work in the same way. And a third thing is, I think, just a lot of hands-on practitioner work. If you've got an in-house UX research team, they're going to be doing research. a lot of in-house market research teams are not doing that much research. They're doing a lot of insight management and stakeholder, liaison and things like that. So to me, there's a lot of innovation in methods, a lot of innovation in tech, but I think culturally and methodologically, I think there's a lot that we can learn from in market research by looking at UX research.
So we should be looking at things like Don Norman's Design of Everyday Things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great inspirational book. I mean, it's 40 years old now, but it's a good place to start. There's actually a much bigger culture, I think, of very open sharing. You'll find people who work in-house in Google, Facebook research teams publishing case studies on Medium and sharing it with the world in a way you'd never get in the consumer insight space anymore. So it's quite refreshing. So
would anybody else on the panel like to chip in on this urge to, yes, Melanie?
Yeah, I agree. So we have in the US, we do include some UX testing and we have them in our top 50. That we have the top 50 expanded market, and then we have the top firms in the more traditional market. And in the expanded market, we have some really cool user testing. We could even develop over time a user testing segment. So, right now and we'll talk about this more when I introduce my topic, but we have 8 segments and we could introduce another segment. What it really comes down to is having a source for measuring it.
Yep.
And so we would just have to develop that source. And then as we talk about our numbers, there's a lot of UX CX done in brands that we can't quite capture. We capture things that are done through the partner network if they outsource it, but if they do it in-house, it can be really hard to capture that too. So there's still some things that we need to capture, but I agree, it's a big and growing part. And the Insights Association has done some, cross promoting of our conference. We do an X event, and we have an X tract at our annual conference. We invite CXPA and other companies to come and talk about UX. And we are a big believer in these sort of emerging models within brands where everything is kind of coming together and falling under one roof because they're learning from each other and creating these very symbiotic cultures of data sharing and so I support what you said.
Yeah.
And I think it's an important time too, because when you look at brand loyalty through the pandemic, it changed. People had to go to other brands and start to use other things. And part of it could be the experience that the brands are giving out to their customers. So it's a great time to almost springboard it.
I think there are a couple of things we can, as market research, actually pick from the UX and product research space. Apart from the agility, I mean, I think Mike talked about that. It's just the agile, it's approach to things. I mean, definitely we can pick that up. And if I also look at the focus on usability testing, in my head, I'm thinking, of our, the study materials that we actually use in market research. Do we put as much emphasis on what our profitability check of that, of those materials? Those are things from UX we can borrow and we can bring in here when we have at the back of our mind the person who's going to answer that questionnaire, or the person who's going to sit in the room to be part of that focus group, or that person we're going to be meeting and we're going to be doing that in-depth interview with. We try to get into the the persona of that person as we're designing the instruments. That's something we can pick from UX. Again, gamification, of course, that has gained a bit of traction within our space, but UX does a lot of user journey, trying to see how do we smoothen the entire interaction with with a product. That's something again that we can take to another level within the market research space, that we think of the survey participants or the focus group participants from a point of view of how do we smoothen the entire interaction and then get the best data, as it were, that is going to be very meaningful and directional for the client from that. I mean, those would be two areas that I feel that, it's low-hanging fruits that we can actually pick from UX and product research.
Great. Any closing thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I think there's probably, let's say half a dozen core methods and tools that are used, most of the time in UX research, and then maybe another 10 or 12 that are more niche, things like card sorting and tree jacking, that type of thing. But the core of the principles around journey mapping, around prototyping, around observing how people engage, it's I think there's a lot that can be used to inform market research thinking for sure. And I think there's probably, with a lot of cost pressures that are coming down the line, there's going to be pressure inside organizations to rationalize the different research functions. So it's in everybody's interest, I think, to get an understanding across these functions so that they can be a little bit more flexible, if they are going to put together product and market research teams.
So I've just spotted a question in the QA tool, so I'll shout this one out. Is the panel agreeing that the brand activities are triggering first purchase, so marketing, sales, etc., and UX and product experience is creating loyalty?
Interesting frame. I don't think it's just about. No, I don't think so at all, because you have a lot of focus in UX research on conversion optimization. So how do you make sure that somebody clicks add to basket or click subscribe or whatever that is? And I think that's very much about turning people from users into customers or visitors into engaged participants. So I think it's not quite as straightforward as that, but I think for building the funnel at the front end, yes, brand and broadcast is much more important. And then refining the experience, I think a lot of the focus is on UX.
Yeah, I do think that that UX and product experience has a place all along the product funnel, right? And so that said, there's a lot more that goes into loyalty than just the product experience too, right? It can have a lot to do with social and needs and Maslow, and it could just, so it's a cool framework, but I don't think it's quite as clean as that.
Now, we've also got a follow-up there about sensory testing. Now, traditionally, sensory testing has fallen inside the market research world. There would have been some sensory testing that wasn't. And it's normally been before product launch and before re-evaluation. After all, the most famous clanger of all time, Coke 2, was the product of sensory testing when they found a better testing Coke and a bad strategic move to do with it. So I think, it's going to fit in all along the route. And we want to make sure that things like that stay associated with our industry, that we keep learning from them and we keep sharing our good points too. Because there's plenty they can learn from us as well as us learning.
Yeah, for sure.
And sensory is another one where one of the reasons any product or tool gets limited is because it's expensive or it's slow or it's not mass available. As these products and tools and techniques evolve and become more available, less expensive, more automated, then they become more available to all parts of our research world. And sensory is another example of that. It was more limited because it was quite intrusive. It was hard to implement, hard to execute. As some handheld sensory devices have evolved, and even just your phones evolve and your watches. All of a sudden, sensory can be everywhere, and so it will continue to evolve in its use and maybe touch everything in the future.
Absolutely. So we're going to turn to Seyi now. You're going to talk to us about one of the trends you're seeing, the rise in specialist firms.
Right. Thank you, Ray. Yes. Over the last, say, 2-3 years, I've seen data, and I will talk about the data that shows that in terms of share of revenue from the global inside market, which is estimated to be about $118 billion US. From H2 2020, we've seen the split between generalist type of firms and specialist type of firms actually moving from 73% to 27% to about 56% for generalists and 44% for specialists. And this has been driven by a couple of factors. Number one is the rapid growth, maybe accelerated by COVID-19 and the old pandemic impact on our industry. We've seen massive growth of tech-enabled research platforms, do-it-yourself type of platforms. While the traditional market research space has grown by about 9%, TR has grown by almost 24% or thereabout, with DIY platforms growing at about 28%. And the implication of that is that a number of simple, easy to do, general type of work have actually moved inward for clients. Maybe not really a big factor in this part of the world in Africa yet, but we're seeing increasingly. I mean, because these platforms are available from anywhere you might be, anywhere in the world, as long as you understand they're easy to use. That again is putting pressure, as it were, on pricing. I think Mike talked about that at some point about costing and all of that. And then number two is the broader perma crisis world context. I mean, rising inflation rates, slowing, economic growth rates. I think for the first time, I was listening to the president of IMF, and she was saying that for the first time, they're actually saying that China's growth rate will slow down and should be lower than that of the global growth rate. I mean, there are countries like Turkey where inflation rate is at 80%. You can imagine the impact on consumers and, of course, on brands and businesses that actually serve these consumers. What that dovetails into for businesses that they're asking more questions. There's a lot of shifts and changes around the consumers, and of course impacting the way they interact with brands, and of course impacting how business also being organized and how the categories being moving. So they're also asking a lot of questions like, the changes is quite rapid. And finally, that dovetails into what I call, which is I've seen a couple of conversations here and there around now words. Clients are asking for commercial-oriented recommendations. Don't just come and say, okay, this is a powerful insight from the consumer or the category, but now I want you to speak commercial terms. I want to see recommendations that I can actually take, to the executives, the ESCO, the next year, and they can make decisions. However, that level of expertise can only come if there's deep-seated sector-level expertise in firms. And that's one of the ways that, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing the growth of specialist market research firms that are focused on certain sectors. It could be hospitality, it could be financial services, where they have a very robust understanding of those sectors, and they can actually, as it were, give the kind of impactful recommendations on the level of now what that clients are looking for. And again, I mean, as we see, tech-enabled research becoming more prevalent as we go into 2023, also, clients will be looking out for specialist firms who are very robust understanding of certain methodologies, maybe like pricing or shopper, that can actually become a guide for them. Who can tell them, this is how you can step change, what's going on within your category, how you can move your brands from point 1 to point 2. And again, we've seen even research firms extending the frontiers of what they do with clients to include marketing strategy, to implementation, to execution. And all of this is driving the rise of specialist market research firms. Looking to 2023 and years ahead, I think that's pattern will continue.
So, Mike, you're one of these people that are promoting all of these platforms through your insight platforms. Are they leading to the demise of the generalist agency, do you think?
I think there's, I agree with a lot of what Shay's saying. I think what's happening is there's a squeeze in the middle. I think that what technology enables is this huge growth in the kind of long tail. So what you've got is a much lower cost base to be able to do niche things that you were harder to do before. If I want to set up an agency that's going to be specialized in a geography or a category, it's so much easier to do it on a small cost base now with technology. So you've seen that proliferation. So the niche, either tools or agencies or consultancies are growing like crazy, proliferating. And I think what's happened at the other end is you've got this consolidation around an efficiency model, which says scale and volume, is what drives it. So you've got, the bigger getting bigger, and it's two ends of a dumbbell. So I think what's happening is the middle is being squeezed. There isn't really so much room for the generic anymore, unless it's very highly efficient. And then you end up with a very splintered, fragmented and this kind of Cambrian explosion of small businesses that are not necessarily all tech businesses, but tech is the enabling kind of environment that allows them to, to proliferate.
So for those people who've not followed their prehistoric history and geology, the Cambrian means?
The huge growth of organic life and proliferation of species about, what are we talking, 500, 600 million years ago?
I think that's about right.
Ish. So yes, lots of new things growing.
So I guess Sandy and Melanie, one of these are your customers. mostly in terms of standing, but also, Melanie, these are like your member organizations. So what are we seeing going on in the US in this context?
We're definitely seeing specialization. I have quite a few members that have gone from being considered a specialist firm to sort of rebranding themselves and picking verticals that they're going to really focus on. And they're also, so the tools, they're certainly being used by the brands to speed up data and learning for some of the more basic things. And then when they do outsource, they're looking for the things that they're not going to do in-house. And that usually ends up being some sort of a specialty market, specialty audience, specialty verticals of some sort. But the platforms are also being used by all the agencies to speed up their own processes. And so they're being used by small companies, medium-sized companies, big companies, brands are being used all over. And you remember, we've been talking about for years that this didn't need to scare us. We just needed to be prepared for when us as humans and experts use our skills for things that aren't so rote and aren't so automatic, and free up our minds and free up our thinking and our expertise. And, we'll talk about it more in my section, but, really begin to think about fit for purpose. What should we be doing? Where should we be doing it? Doing what, where? That's our job as people. And we're being allowed to free up a lot of our thinking and our time through technology that allows us to use our brains more.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Sandy, any thoughts?
Yeah, so when I think about sort of the DIY platforms that are out there, I, having been in supply for so long, look at sort of the do-it-yourself supply mechanisms that are out there. And when you look at the complexities of some of these specialty firms, like we're looking at the survey programming side, but you have to look at the sampling side too, because it's the people who are feeding into the surveys. And when you get into the specialty firms and you're looking at more challenging audience groups, whether it's B2B or healthcare ailment or doctors per se, there's a segment of people that cannot be found. No matter what you're using as your programming tool, you still have to find the people. And so I look at the model of there's a little bit of you have to do it together, because there's a point where you're not going to find people. And at what point are the platforms not appropriate from the sampling side, as well as the data output side, as well as the programming side?
I think one of the things I'd like to flag up in addition is the tension that agencies then have to go through. If you become a sector specialist, like auto, you need lots of auto clients, and they get quite jumpy about the fact you're working with the competition. They also want to know that you're an expert in the sector. So it's a contradictory pressure, which isn't quite there as much as if you are, say, you work in children's research, you work in pharma research. But there are some of those still pressures. So we probably just need to get the right set of mindsets in those places where you're a specialist, and you have to sell. First of all, you have to sell more expensively to be taken seriously, but also that you are going to be sensitive with IP, but you are going to work across the sectors.
Yeah, and data is a real enabler in this area of specialization. And so sometimes the specialty just comes from you knowing the sector really well, but sometimes it comes from you having access to data in that sector that no one has access to. And so you think about purchase data or insurance data, or what they're buying for their cars, the wheels, whatever. There's a ton of data out there that you can bring in and make a part of your specialty offering. And companies, you can work out the logistics of how you make sure you're competitive, but not breaking NDAs and that sort of thing. If you have the specialty in the space plus the data, you're going to be hard to beat.
Right.
Okay, thanks everyone for that. So that brings us to Melanie's topic, and you're going to give us a bit of a picture of where we are financially and where the trends are taking the money.
Yeah. So it feels really cool to hear what Mike and Sandy and Seyi were talking about, because this feels like it's kind of coming together to surround the story that I wanted to tell. If you followed our last report, the global market research and data and insights and analytics space is now worth nearly $120 billion, $119 billion in 2021 across 8 segments. In the US, I'll let Ray speak here in a second. Ray's going to join me for this conversation rather than just moderate. But in that space in the US, we're $63 billion. and a very strong growth rate for 2021. A part of it because of a catch-up year from a really terrible 2020, but 2021 was a great big growth year. The segments that grew, not surprising here, based on this conversation, self-service platforms was a leader, enterprise feedback management, digital data analytics, and social listening and communities. Those were the 4 big drivers of growth. Now, so we're beginning now our process of measuring 2022, even though we're just in January, we're starting to look at how do we do in 2022. What we expect to see is still growth, though not at those levels. Good, strong, solid growth, but not at the levels of 2021. 2021 also had a really big investment year, $9 billion in investment in our space. We expect that to be a very different story for 2021, quite a bit of slowdown in investment, but in 2022, we expect 2022 to still have strong growth, but slow down in investment. And then moving into this year, what we expect to see this year is a bit more of slowdown in both, a continued slowdown in investment and a bit of a slowdown in purchasing. We don't expect it to be a massive pain point for us, but we do expect it to be a slowdown. And the only thing that could sort of impact that is if, there's a major economic or global event that creeps back in. If for some reason we go into a deep recession or even a depression, if we can't get inflation under control, then all cards and all bets will be off the table. But so, as things are progressing right now, we expect a bit of a slowdown. So what does that mean? In a time of slowdown, economic slowdown, purchasing slowdown, inflation, companies in our space have to compete harder. And so what we expect that to mean is more competition. Brands find themselves under increased scrutiny for what they're going to spend their money on. And so this process that we've been going through over the last couple of years, where we say business impact, prove your worth, prove your worth on the balance sheet, prove your impact, have a measurement that actually goes down. Don't just be a cost center, be a profit center, be a business partner. That's going to prove even more important in the next year or two. Everything is going to have to come back to, is it driving real value that drives real balance sheet activity? And so that's going to flow from the brands down to the partners too. How is this work helping me internally prove and grow our business? And then increase in specialization and innovation. Things will come out and they'll be wrapped up in specialty, and new cool brand names will come out even for methodologies. And it'll create some highly specialized products and services emerging from our space, which is fun to see. And then we expect this process of using all data possible. So not just primary data, because that can take a little longer to pull in, but all the data that's out there to tell quicker, faster, fuller stories. Now, that all sounds, interesting. What are the concerns wrapped around that? The concerns are quality, making sure that as we face all of these new tools, new techniques, that we think about quality, and that we think about data integrity, and we think about ourselves and how we keep our skills honed. And then we think about, you guys know me, fit for purpose. Like, all these new things are going to come out. Are they fit? Are they proven? Do they have a track record of yielding truth and yielding outcome, and not just cool and trendy? And so staying current on our tools, staying current on our craft will become even more urgent. Training will become important, especially as these new things emerge. But so overall, we expect to see, a bit of a slowdown, resulting in increased competition, resulting in more expertise, the desire to bring in new cool tools, and a responsibility along that side to maintain levels of quality, integrity, and professional skill.
Excellent.
What do you think, Ron?
Well, I'm just going to add a little bit of a global outline to that as well, with some big sort of stats, numbers, and perceptions. So, as Seyi said, as Melanie said, we're talking about 120 billion as the big picture. How does that carve up? About half of that is in North America, and sorry, Canada, that's nearly all USA. So that's the first thing. That's colossal. The half of our industry is actually dollars spent in the United States. Dollars spent in they don't go quite as far. It's a fairly expensive country. Next cut, sticking with that theme, 2/3 of all dollars spent are spent in English-speaking countries. UK, USA, Canada except Quebec, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. That has a really big impact on the sort of voices you hear at conferences, where the big sponsors are coming from. It's why so much of the software designed by this industry is not fit for purpose, because it's designed for English, which is like a really clunky, simple language. It's why, and I know that Dimitri is on the line, it's why stuff that comes out of Ukraine or it comes out of Japan has got a lot more flexibility to it, because it's not so easy. If you can get 1% of the United States, that's an enormous amount of money. It's 3 times as much money as getting 1% of all the countries in Asia Pacific, which is really hard because they speak a shed load of languages. So that's one of the factors. 50% of research by dollar is not surveys, focus groups, depth interviews, which is established research. It's all sorts of new research. So we're no longer, if you're in the surveys business, by the time the next data set comes out, we will be in the smaller part of the industry. And the res text, the observation stuff, the applying AI to secondary data, and all of those sort of things are going to be a little bit larger. So the industry is fundamentally changing. Next one, and this comes back to one of the points that Seyi was talking about as well. In a study now that I've run for a couple of years, we talked about the number of projects being held internally, because it's really hard to put a dollar value to an internal project. And about 50% of all client research projects are being run internally. And coming back to Mike's point, often not by the insights team internally. So that again is this big, big change that's going on. And coming back to specialism, the share of qual, which is about 15% of the established research world, hasn't declined and is showing quite a lot of strength moving through that. So we've got a lot of trends going on there. We've got one more that I'm going to throw in relating to Melanie's point about the economy. We're in inflationary times. I am the only person on this call who managed a Western company in inflationary times. We've had inflation in other parts of the world. Seyi, I'm sure you can talk to that. But this is going to have a real impact. Those leveraged companies are going to really struggle because interest rates are going to stay high for quite a long time. In Europe, for even longer. In the US, probably till just before the next round of elections, when it wouldn't be surprising to see them dip a little bit. That's going to make life difficult for lots and lots of companies. And it's one of the reasons why the acquisitions are changing. And there has been a change as well in how we consider a good company. For a while, most of my 45 years in this industry, it was if you made profits. But then for the last 6 or 7 years, it's been about your valuation. You might have 0 revenue, but a really high valuation. And we're switching back to much more of a value based on your turnover, based on making profits. And Mike, I want to go to you next, because you posted something highlighting a similar sort of point with the Ipsos share price.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think it has been, there is definitely a sort of reversion to fundamentals, and are you a good business, and are you actually generating more money than you take in? But I think there's a shift in the sort of venture funded, growth focused tech end of the market. I think he's going to come under pressure. We're going to see some difficult times in some of those companies. But then I think we've got a lot of private equity that's come into the industry over the last few years. A lot of these companies that are rolling up for what Seyi was saying, these kind of multi-specialist groups like, Strat7 in the UK, Material in the US, taking in a lot of independent agencies, rolling them up and bulking them into something big. And I think we're going to see a lot of price pressure, profitability pressure on margins to return to those investors. You see Insights Consulting has just done its 10th acquisition in 5 years or something. So there's a lot of these groups are going to have to really focus heavily on profitability for the private equity investors, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've worked for all the money in my career. You know, the PE money, the VC money, the private money, the public money. I've worked for all the monies, and they each have a very different playbook. I think that would actually be a really interesting conversation for us to have with with people all over the profession, so they really understand. And what's hardest and what's shifting right now is when we can't predict the future of the economy because things are in such flux, it becomes very difficult to make a valuation of a company that is more of a future looking valuation, rather than I can see that they're making money right now, and I can see that there's a potential to make more money if I push some companies together and squash some redundant services. And so the PE case is still a little bit safer to bet right now, because you see 4 companies, you smush them together, you take out some redundancies, and all of a sudden you have a little bit more of a profit from a proven profit track record of these companies already. But if you take a company that is all on the bet of the future, and you can't predict the future because of the way the economy is going, that becomes a much more difficult conversation to have, and is what causes investments and money to slow down from a VC world, and from and when we did the $9 billion all-time record 2021, a lot of it was platforms and analytics, and they were all on the future. And right now the future is so uncertain that money is much harder to come by.
Yeah,
and the interest rates are killing the cash. So
well, the collective valuation loss on big tech is bigger than the GDP of the UK, and I think something like $2 trillion has come off those big companies. But somebody like Qualtrics, who was up at so $30 billion valuation post IPO, is now down at 5 or 6, which is probably a little bit more realistic based on its fundamentals and true growth prospects over the next decade.
Sandy, did I hear your voice a moment ago?
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens, because when you look at profitability comes at the what are you paying to get your work done, whether it's your data analytics, the tools you're using, or again, the people. So I'm curious to see what happens with the cost of supply, because we've seen it go down so far south. Now people are going to have to charge more to make more and to incent more and to do more. So this will be an interesting sort of scenario to see how that plays out, and what happens at the platforms, right? When we look at the profitability of the Lucid Cent acquisition or the merger of the companies, the profitability wasn't huge when those companies came together, at least on the Lucid side. So I'm curious to see how this all plays out.
Labor is a really important piece of this. I've heard a lot of the CEOs that I talked to, many of them have said they've had to raise salaries like even 10 to 15% across the board, and they're not raising their prices 10 to 15% across the board, and because they can't. And so where's that money come from? And all of them have different answers, and that's one of the business sort of decisions that they're having to make alongside their boards. But labor is a really big driver of a change in where the money's going to be, and a change, to your point, even in profitability. So very interesting shift right now.
And a lot of layoffs are happening right now too. So I think there's a greater
If you have to pay people 10 to 15% more, maybe you need 10 to 15% less people, right?
Yeah, you're getting more out of those that you're paying more too. I think there's a little bit of that going on, because there's a lot of whispers of layoffs happening across every industry company. I mean, every company that we're looking at that we all are fairly familiar with. So I think people have to probably prove their worth a little bit more in the organizations they're in, so that they're driving the profitability of the company at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, just looking at it from African Middle East point of view, I do know that compared to 2020, going to 2021, they have, from 2%, that region, our region has grown to about 4%, which is like, doubling, but it's coming from a small base. I'm curious to see what kind of activities of VC or funds that will happen within our space, because that's something that's commendable. That's 100% growth, right? But some of the things you're saying, Sandy, around talent, it's equally very a present challenge on the side, side of town. I think it's also coming on the back of inflation, economic slow down, and cost of living, so if all I do it's work with your firm. You must be able to take me home. My take home must be able to take me home at the end of the day. I mean, and it's just common sense, right? So, but then it's again putting a lot of pressure on how you then manage firms, how you keep people happy. Talents will tell you tons of other things they need, but I've always found out that at the end of the day, it's about the money in the pocket that they go with. And that has, there's consequences for how you run business. There's consequences for profitability. There's consequences for how you begin to chat to clients to remain, profitable, because it's all about cash flow. The minute you're out of cash, it's game over. It's game over. It's just
Absolutely.
game over.
And that brings up the talent shortages. While there are layoffs in some areas and there are sort of rumors of more, if we're talking about researchers, business consultants, there is a global talent shortage, partly driven by people my age, frankly, people 10 years younger than me deciding to retire is one of the problems. And of course, we didn't recruit nearly as many people during the pandemic. So as Seyi says, step one, you want to keep all your good people. And that's going to mean more than paying them, but it includes paying them.
It's the same sort of model that we used to have about customers. Remember, it costs more to replace a customer than it does to just keep the one you have. Same with employees. It costs far more to replace a really good employee in training and paying, and you'll lose some accounts if they're a good employee that has a really good relationship. It's worth it to pay them a little bit more, but then your cost model shifts. And so how are you going to make that up? And it's
And it's understanding the self-benefits of a people-first company. Like, we're very people-focused at Innovate, and it's so important, because the reality is, at the end of the day, you don't work for a company, you work for people. And if you're good people, your good people should stay.
Yeah. So we're going to move to our last topic, the one. Sorry.
Maybe just one quick
comment,
just listening to Melanie and Sandy, just to balance the conversation around, salaries and the rest of it. People are also looking for a space where they're actually comfortable to work, and if there's also a generational shift. So what we were looking for when we started working, it's not what the guys we need to deal with today are looking for. It's all about quality of work life. That's what they're concerned about. So quality of work life is really big, and of course, what you pay me is part of that, but there are other things that comes together, to deliver that quality of work life.
Yeah, having a voice in the room, very, very important to this generation. So super glad you said that. So it's this entire value proposition that is very, very different from just a great salary with enough time off.
Right.
And career pathing them, teaching them where they can get to, so they stay within the industry, enjoy what they're doing, get paid a good salary and good quality life balance. I think all of it matters. Right.
Absolutely.
So we're going to move to our final topic, which is one that Lenny was going to bring, which is ChatGPT. And I heard a lovely podcast the other day and in fact, Lenny was on that podcast along with Viv from Question Pro and Jamin Brazil from all sorts of podcasts. And Jamin came up with the view that ChatGPT and it's we're going to make a bigger impact on research than the internet did. Now, the rest of the panel didn't entirely go with that point of view, but I'd be curious, what is the significance of ChatGPT and what might happen this year? So the podcast, by the way, there's a thing in chat stream, Listen with Dan. It's a Question Pro podcast, quick declaration of interest. Question Pro are a sponsor of NewMR. But yeah, you'll find it on Listen with Dan on YouTube. So who wants to have a pitch at what you think the impacts this year are going to be and why?
Well, I mean, I could kick off, and more so because I don't know tons a lot about it, so it's easy for me to just start off. One would be, I'm just fascinated, even as a person, as a professional, leave alone the industry. I'm just fascinated that it's actually possible to begin to, for us to begin to experience what I would call a usable conversational AI platform. Right. Before now, AI has been there, but it's very fluffy. You can't touch it within the industry. But I think ChatGPT is bringing it to bear. like, you know what, we can actually, maybe in another 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, actually have a very solid conversational AI, methodology that we can begin, to leverage within the industry. On a lighter note, I actually typed in my name, who is Seyi Adeoye. I was so upset, no clue. Chat GPT, they know anybody called Seyi Adeoye.
Remember, it's more than a year out of date. It doesn't have any data from 22.
Right. And then we had a session internally, just trying to look at the application of the platform, around different things that we do, from designing a discussion guide to questionnaires, writing context or background information of clients and all of that. And it's a pretty amazing, the output. Like it's like light and day if you compare it to Google. And what you get from Google, and then you still need to read through and then collate and triangulate the data and all of that. However, whether it's true, it's a different ballgame, totally. So there's still a truth test that we need to check on. And then, when I begin to also think about it from, sorry, my son just walked into the room. Right. Where we begin also, think about how credible are the guides or the questionnaires. There's also the question about the context of the information, right? I'm sure there's still quite a lot that evolution that will take place. But what will be critical that I'll really be looking out for is the ability of the platform to be able to ask the right questions in the right context as we go on.
So one of the things I've noticed is quite a few people, particularly in LinkedIn, which is where I see most of these discussions, they've asked ChatGPT to do a discussion guide, or they've asked it to write the questions for a survey, testing, shampoos, or something like this. And you look at them and they're pretty shocking. They're not very good. And they're better than a lot of the ones I see being used at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nothing like the good stuff. Mike, you ran a webinar actually on generative AI and ChatGPT came out. Do you have a consensus coming out of that session?
I think the belief that the Nick Cave, I don't know if anybody's seen the sort of Nick Cave response to the one where somebody briefed it to write a Nick Cave in the style of Nick Cave was particularly blistering. And you're right, it can generate very competent, fairly kind of bland stuff. So, it's at the level, and this is still remarkable, abilities, but it's like having somebody who's a sort of entry level person, going away and kind of collating ideas and coming back and presenting them. So, there's a lot of nuance and experience that's going to be missing, and I think it's going to take a while to do that. But I think what we're going to see is a lot of creativity in building applications on top of, it's not just GPT-3. I think, the next iteration of that large language model, Google has some down the pipe. There's going to be a lot of, text to anything, whether it's, text to video, text to audio. And we'll see a lot of creative applications in research. So, idea generation, desk research, the drafting of content, the summarization, paraphrasing. There's a lot of, I think, turbocharging or making things efficient for people. And I think, if we just look back at the conversation we just had about, wage increases, cost base rises, potentially you're going to see some redundancies across the sector. If this works in harmony, I think we are going to see a productivity boost, not to be, dispassionately economist about it, but because we will see the substitution of a lot of old manual process by some of these tools over the next couple of years, but it's going to take a while, I think.
So Melanie, you're concerned about its truthfulness.
Yeah, no, well, so what GPT does, if people are like it essentially, you go into Google and you say, tell me about oranges, and Google will give you 1 billion sites where you can go and learn about oranges. What ChatGPT does is it takes those 1 billion sites and it summarizes it up into an outcome for you and says, here's what I know about oranges based on those 1 billion sites. And that's cool, actually, as a place to sort of say, what's the internet at large think about oranges? Or Seyi or Melanie or Ray or any topic. We asked it, what is the difference between market research, AI, and machine learning? Just curious. And so it takes all those things and it aggregates it up into a response. Now, if you are out there and you click on those 1 billion sites, some of them are great and some of them are not great. Some of them are really good and some of them are terrible. And all of that sort of feeds into the outcome that you're going to get from a chat GPT. And so we're going to have to, as humans, filter through that. Some of the content that we're going to get is going to be pretty cool and it'll give us a place to start. Some of it's going to be really bad. But the thing with ChatGPT is if you go into it thinking it's going to give you truthfulness, it doesn't know truth from fact. It just knows data. And it might even lie to you and tell you that something exists that doesn't exist. It doesn't know, it doesn't have a center of ethics that says, don't ever tell a lie, right? I mean, it doesn't. It is. So there have been some really important tests that have said there's potential here. And there have been some really big tests that have said there's potential for a big problem here. And so us as researchers, our job is going to be to think about, again, what is this data set that it's drawing from? Is it a good data set? Is it a fit data set? And is the outcome that I'm getting fit for use, fit for purpose, fit for decision making? So, I think there's a place for it. I've always said there's a place for panel, there's a place for online, there's a place for AI, there's a place for GPT, but all of that's going to have to be overseen by us as the expert researchers in the space and making sure that it's used appropriately and guided by our ethics.
And
so Sandy, just to chip in first for you. We've got a question here. I'm going to broaden it. So how might ChatGPT help fraudsters? How might ChatGPT help panels defeat fraudsters?
So I look at the side of the fraudsters coming in. Fraudsters today, when there's an open end, they will go to Google and they'll ask a question and they get an answer and then they put it into an open end section. And if it passes tests and so forth, they will then take that copy and paste. So from that regard, I think that's the biggest risk in my mind, where I'm so quality focused and making sure the data we provide to people, we all are, right? We all want to make sure the data is spot on. That's my concern with this particular sort of tool. In terms of catching fraudsters, I don't know yet. I don't know well enough because maybe my glass is half empty, but I'm looking at it as more of a risk and open-end research than I am as a protection. But I do know that all the tools that are out there, and there's so many tools that are protection-focused tools, has got to start to look at how do we find them going into a place to pull the data that they need? And is it real life translation of someone moving from one site to another to get the information they need to fill it back in? Maybe. And do you stop them right away? But there's definitely a discussion that has to happen. I think, again, all the associations are coming together to look at this from a risk factor.
So just coming back to the veracity, I do one of those terrible things where I said, who is Ray Poynter market researcher? If you asked just Ray Poynter, it probably wouldn't know. But by the time you put a bit more in the question, and it came back with lots of things which I know to be true. It came back with some things that I would hope true. But it also came back with, for example, that I'm a professor of the University of Bedfordshire. I've never been a professor. I didn't know there was a University of Bedfordshire. And it said that equally believably. Now, when I ask a question that I know the answer to, it works fine. And in fact, I was asked a statistical question recently. I came up with what I thought was the right answer. I then asked ChatGPT, and after a couple of tweaks of the question, I got the same answer back. And I thought, that's great. Because I know the answer, I can use the answer. But if I didn't understand the stats, I'd have really struggled to know whether this was just one of ChatGPT's fibs. But I think the real thing that has happened is this is the opening of Pandora's box. More people now see what the experts have known for a couple of years, which is where this level of AI is. And there are tens of thousands of people thinking now creatively about how to apply that in lots and lots of different ways. How does it work with Dungeons and Dragons? How does it help me select a better soccer team? How does it help me get a better grade in my assignment at high school? And so many things. And I think it's very hard to know where this is going to go. But I would certainly say you want to be trying this and you want to be involved. Don't just wait and see. I think that could lead you being the new Nokia or the new Kodak if you decided to wait too long.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good point. So we too are products and we have to stay marketable, right? We're brands, we're products, and our product life cycle gets extended by evolving ourselves as researchers. And so it's our responsibility to get in there and to understand it. And when our next client says, "Hey, I just want to use ChatGPT," to understand where it will work and where it won't, and to guide them, and not just to bear our head in the sand and say, "No, it's terrible," because it really is going to have some really good uses. We just have to ring fence those, identify them, and use them appropriately. Like Randy Ellison said, if you think like a programmer, it can create some very competent guides and questionnaires. That's cool. And I want to get some of those out and I want to test them and I want to play with them. But it's still going to require researchers. We're not going anywhere. We just need to evolve our skill set to work with the new tools.
So I'm going to just dive to one of the comments immediately below that in the chat stream from Fadila, which is about slightly earlier up to do with confidentiality. Let's imagine that you're a research company and you've done this great big report for Procter & Gamble and you think, is my summary good? So I'll upload it into ChatGPT and it would generate a summary. You say, oh, right, yeah, that's good. Actually, that's a bit. Who now owns a copy of that report? Somebody. You've just uploaded a confidential copy of that report to Procter & Gamble somewhere. And I have no idea who can now access that. Where that
don't do that, by the way.
Actually, that's the point I was making with irony, but actually to get a global picture, you're right. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah. That's funny.
Okay. Any closing thoughts on ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've all been bewitched by ChatGPT. I think, it's important to bear in mind that that is one product built on top of, a large language model, and that there's going to be lots and lots of different permutations of this. There are companies that are already building on top of that with custom models that are trained on data that is, specific to different branches of research. I think, this is not, this is kind of like open people's eyes to what's possible with the technology, but there are going to be much more broader applications of it than just that kind of, chat interface type thing. A lot of which are going to take some difficult ethical and business decisions to work through, some of which are going to be, incredibly liberating and creative. So I think, we're into quite exciting times with it.
And I would like to just jump on Mike's point. I think we're still at the very beginning, of the possibilities, to be honest. I'm looking forward to how it can really kind of, enable what we currently do within the industry, not take away from it. I totally agree with Melanie. As long as there are humans on planet Earth, you will always need researchers. You always need that human context. So it's all about the application is all about how we end up being able to also create parallel checkmates, like on all the problems we're identifying at the moment. That, is it correct? Is the context right? Is it picking wrong data? And all of that. I'm sure as we go on, it's a journey. This is just like the foundational kind of work. Maybe we'll get, a lot of things that we can talk around and find extremely usable, maybe in another 12 months, maybe. But hey, fingers crossed.
One thing I think is interesting is if, we've been around a long time in the industry, and when new things have come to play, whether it was online research or mobile research, how long it took for people to actually sit around, talk about it, and accept the fact that it was coming. And this sort of transpiring so much faster than anything we've historically seen in our industry. So we've come a long way with being more open and accepting to new methodologies.
Absolutely. So, well, thank you so much, Seyi, Sandy, Melanie, and Mike. I'm going to move through now to the closing down section. Thank you for everybody who's asked questions as well. That's great. So that's our wonderful panel. So for that, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all again sometime soon. Bye for now.